All right, so get ready because today we're diving into a really fascinating topic. You sent in this article about why someone might always be on your mind.
Uh-huh.
And it kind of brings together like Carl Jung and Stoicism
Yeah,
in a way I've never seen before.
I know. I thought that was so interesting.
Huh.
The title itself.
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
Like, 5 unexpected Carl Jung secrets to why someone is always on your mind, Stoicism.
Yeah, definitely a little clickbaity.
Uh-huh. For sure.
But the idea itself, I think, is really intriguing.
I agree.
We've all had that experience where someone just kind of pops into your head out of
Pops.
nowhere.
Yeah.
But this article suggests it might not actually be about them at all, which I just thought was so interesting.
It's true.
Yeah.
And that's where I think Carl Jung's idea of the shadow self comes in.
Okay.
It's essentially all the parts of ourselves.
Right.
The traits, the desires, the things that we've kind of pushed down or haven't really fully acknowledged.
So, okay, like if I'm constantly thinking about someone who's like super successful,
Mm-hmm.
it's not necessarily because I'm like low-key stalking their LinkedIn profile.
Right.
It's more about what that success represents to me.
Yes, exactly.
Uh-huh.
Maybe there are some unexamined ambitions or maybe even fears around achievement
Right.
that their success is kind of like triggering in you.
Oh, interesting.
It's almost that their life is a mirror
Wow.
and it's reflecting something back at you that you haven't fully dealt with
Okay.
internally.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. So it's not about like becoming obsessed with the other person,
Oh,
but using those thoughts to understand ourselves better.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the Stoic perspective
Okay.
kind of adds another really interesting layer to it all.
I'm curious.
Well, Marcus Aurelius said, if you are pained by external things,
Mm-hmm.
it is not they that disturb you, but your own judgment of them.
Okay, so how does that apply to having someone stuck in our heads?
Right.
Is it like, is the person like the external thing
Mm-hmm.
and our thoughts about them are the judgment?
That's a really interesting way to put it
Okay.
because it highlights how we actually have a choice here.
Okay.
We can get, swept up in analyzing them,
Right.
or we can kind of turn inward and ask,
Mm-hmm.
what is it about this person, about their qualities or their life
Right.
that's creating such a strong reaction in it?
Yeah, I like that. The article also talked about these thoughts being like emotional breadcrumbs,
Oh, yeah.
which I thought was like such a cool metaphor.
It is. It is a good one.
Yeah.
Well, Jung really believed that our unconscious mind
Uh-huh.
was often trying to communicate with us
Okay.
through symbols and these recurring thoughts.
Interesting.
So like those breadcrumbs, those could be clues
Mm-hmm.
about something that we need to pay attention to.
Okay.
Some unresolved emotion, some unmet need that's trying to like surface.
So like if those thoughts are tinged with like regret, for example,
Yeah. Good example.
what might that be telling me? Is there something in my past,
Mm-hmm.
maybe related to this person or to a similar situation, that I haven't fully processed?
It's a great question to ask yourself. And the article mentions regret,
Uh-huh.
longing, unresolved anger,
Yeah.
but those are really just kind of starting points.
Right.
I think the key is to really pay attention to the specific emotional flavor
Yeah.
of those thoughts
Mm-hmm.
and how they make you feel.
Which that brings in another Stoic idea, right? That we shouldn't try to like avoid our emotions, but actually examine them, try to
Yeah.
understand their root.
Exactly.
Didn't Seneca say something about like making our thoughts pure
He did.
and reflective of our rational soul?
It's not about suppressing those thoughts or feelings, but engaging with them,
Right.
Consciously.
Yeah.
Like instead of thinking, ugh, why can't I stop thinking about this person?
Uh-huh.
You can shift to, okay, what is this feeling trying to tell me? What can I learn about myself from this?
Okay, this next concept I thought was both familiar but also kind of tricky.
Okay.
Projection.
Yes.
We've all heard that term, but how do we know if we're actually doing it?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it can be subtle.
Okay.
Essentially, projection is when we're unconsciously attributing our own feelings, desires, or even fears
Right.
onto other people.
Okay.
It's like we're seeing a part of ourselves reflected back,
Oh.
but we don't realize that it's actually coming from within.
Okay, so the article had those like contrasting examples, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like I could be totally fascinated by someone's ambition because I secretly wish I were more ambitious myself.
Yes. Or Or, on the flip side, like, their ambition might drive you crazy because it triggers your own insecurities about achieving your goals.
So it's not necessarily that they are overly ambitious or whatever. It's that those qualities are somehow like hitting a nerve, revealing something about my own internal landscape.
You got it.
Okay.
And again, I think Stoicism offers a really practical way to approach this.
Okay.
Like, Epictetus said, there's only one way to happiness, and that is to cease worrying about things which are beyond the power of our will.
Okay.
We can't control how ambitious someone else is.
Right.
But we can control how we react to it.
Yeah.
And what we choose to focus on.
So instead of like getting caught up in judging the other person, we can use those feelings of annoyance or fascination as a prompt for self-reflection.
Exactly.
Ask ourselves, okay, what's going on inside me that this is like triggering?
It transforms those initially frustrating or confusing thoughts into an opportunity for growth.
I like that.
You're no longer just a passive observer. You're actively engaging with your own inner world.
All right, this is where things start to feel a little out there, even for me.
Okay.
Synchronicity.
Ah, yes. The meaningful coincidences.
Exactly. The article mentions, like, those moments where you're thinking about someone and then bam, they text you. Or you run into them at the coffee shop. You're just like, whoa, is the universe, like, sending me a sign?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Jung did believe these synchronicities held, like, a deeper meaning. But I think the Stoics, with their emphasis on a rationally ordered universe, might interpret those events a little differently.
Right.
It's not necessarily about fate or destiny in a mystical sense, but more about what we choose to make of those encounters.
So, okay, maybe that person's sudden appearance isn't some grand cosmic sign.
Right.
But it does highlight maybe some unresolved feelings I have about them. Or maybe an opportunity that I haven't acted on yet. It's like almost like a nudge from my subconscious saying, hey, pay attention to this.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the Stoic idea of focusing on what's in our control comes back into play, right?
Okay.
Like, instead of getting lost in the why of the coincidence, we can ask ourselves, what can I learn from this? What action can I take?
Okay, the final concept from the article is definitely the most unfamiliar to me. Anima and animus.
Okay.
I'll be honest, I need some guidance on this one.
All right, well, this is where
this
is where Jung gets a little more complex.
Okay.
But I'll try to break it down.
Okay.
So anima and animus aren't about literal genders.
Right.
They represent, like, the feminine and masculine principles.
Okay.
The Jungian sense that exists within each of us, regardless of our biological sex.
So it's more about a balance of qualities within ourselves. Like the article mentioned being drawn to someone's like nurturing energy or their like decisiveness.
Yes.
Could those be examples of like animus playing out?
Absolutely. And the idea is that the people who kind of get stuck in our heads might be embodying those animus qualities that we need to develop or integrate more fully in ourselves.
So if I'm constantly thinking about someone who's like incredibly decisive, it might be a sign that I need to like step into my own power and be more assertive.
Or conversely, if you're drawn to someone who's like deeply compassionate, it could be a sign that you need to cultivate more gentleness and understanding, either towards yourself or others.
That's amazing. It's like they're holding up a mirror, not just to our shadow selves, but to this whole like inner balance of energies that we might not even be aware of.
Exactly.
Wow.
And that ties in really beautifully with the Stoic focus on harmony and balance.
Okay.
Like Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Nothing happens to any man that he is not formed by nature to bear."
Wow, I like that.
It's about accepting and embracing the fullness of who we are with all of our so-called masculine and feminine traits.
Which is a great segue to the next part of our deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
But I think like the overarching theme is pretty clear. These like lingering thoughts about someone else, as annoying as they can be, can actually be a huge opportunity for self-discovery.
That's really the key takeaway, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not about like obsessing over the other person, but using those thoughts as a springboard for deeper self-reflection.
It's about asking ourselves, what can I learn from this? What does this tell me about what I need or desire?
And even if we never fully figure out why someone's on our mind, the process of asking those questions, of getting curious about our inner world, is valuable in itself.
It's like those persistent thoughts are like a knock on the door to our own unconscious, inviting us to explore what lies within.
Exactly.
All right, so that was part 1 of our deep dive.
I'm ready for part 2.
All right, let's do it.
You know, it's really fascinating how these concepts, while rooted in very different schools of thought, ultimately kind of lead us to the same conclusion. Self-knowledge is key.
It really is. Like both Jung and the Stoics are saying, like, hey, stop focusing so much on, the external world. And pay attention to what's going on inside you.
Yeah, and that persistent thought about someone, like it's like a signal flare almost. Drawing your attention inward.
Interesting.
The article even suggests some practical tools we can use to kind of decode those signals. Like journaling, for instance.
Oh, yeah. Journaling. That's something I've always meant to be, like, more consistent with. I can definitely see how that could be helpful in this situation.
Totally. It allows you to kind of get those thoughts and feelings out of your head and onto paper. Which can often reveal patterns and insights that might not have noticed otherwise.
Oh, interesting.
You start to see connections, recurring themes, maybe even some of those emotional breadcrumbs we were talking about earlier.
It's like creating a map almost of your own inner landscape.
Exactly.
And the article also mentions mindfulness.
Yes.
Which that also seems like it could be a powerful tool here.
Absolutely. Mindfulness is all about being present with your thoughts and feelings without judgment. So instead of pushing those persistent thoughts away, you simply observe them. What sensations do they bring up in your body? What memories or associations do they trigger? It's about becoming more aware of those subconscious patterns that might be driving those thoughts.
So instead of being annoyed by them, I can actually use them as like valuable data.
Exactly. It's like turning those thoughts into allies.
I like that.
Guides on your journey of self-discovery.
And that data can help us understand ourselves better. Which is ultimately like what both Jung and the Stoics were all about. The article talks about integrating the shadow self. Those parts of ourselves we tend to like hide or deny.
And the Stoics actually had a similar idea. With the concept of amor fati. Which is often translated as love of fate. It's about embracing the totality of our experience. The good and the bad. The light and the shadow.
Because those like shadow parts are still a part of us, right? We can't just like ignore them and hope they'll go away.
Exactly. And the Stoics believe that resisting those parts of ourselves only creates more suffering. It's like that saying, what you resist persists. So instead of pushing those difficult emotions or thoughts away, we can turn towards them. Try to understand them.
So how does this relate to having someone constantly on our mind?
Well, remember those emotional breadcrumbs we were talking about? Maybe those persistent thoughts are pointing to a shadow aspect of ourselves that we haven't fully integrated yet.
Oh, interesting.
Maybe that person represents something we're afraid of or something we, deeply desire but haven't allowed ourselves to pursue.
So by paying attention to those thoughts and the feelings they bring up, we can kind of start to uncover those hidden parts of ourselves and move towards like a greater sense of wholeness.
That's the idea. And it brings us back to that initial insight that those thoughts about someone else might actually be a reflection of our own unmet needs or desires.
Like maybe their success reminds us of our own unfulfilled ambitions.
Or their kindness highlights areas where we could be more compassionate towards ourselves or others.
It's like they're holding up a mirror, showing us parts of ourselves that we might not have even realized were there.
And then it becomes a choice, right?
Oh, yeah.
Do we ignore that reflection or do we use it as an opportunity to grow?
Right. The Stoics would say that, like a wise person chooses growth, chooses to turn every obstacle into a path towards like self-improvement.
Exactly.
But sometimes like that first step can feel really daunting.
It's true.
We might be afraid of what we'll find when we start like looking inward.
It's true. It takes courage to kind of confront those shadow parts of ourselves.
Right.
But, the Stoics also believed that we have the power to choose our response to any situation.
Yeah.
And that power lies in our thoughts. Like Marcus Aurelius said, the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts.
So instead of getting overwhelmed by those persistent thoughts, we can reframe them as opportunities for growth and self-discovery.
Exactly.
But how do we actually do that? The article mentions some techniques besides, journaling and mindfulness.
It did. It talks about something called active imagination.
Okay.
Which might sound a little intimidating at first, but it's actually a very powerful tool for connecting with your unconscious mind.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What exactly is active imagination?
Well, it's a technique developed by Jung.
Okay.
And it's essentially about actively engaging with your unconscious mind.
Okay.
Through imagery and symbolism.
So instead of just sitting and thinking about things, I'm actually creating a mental movie.
Yeah, you could think of it that way. It's about using your imagination to create a kind of dialogue with those unconscious forces that might be behind those persistent thoughts.
And the article gave the example of picturing the person that you keep thinking about and having a conversation with them in your mind.
Exactly. You can imagine them sitting across from you.
Okay.
And you can ask them questions, express your feelings, or just observe what they do and say.
Interesting.
It's like a guided dream, almost.
Okay.
Where you allow those unconscious contents to kind of emerge and express themselves.
That sounds a little out there, but also really cool. How would someone actually do this? What are the steps?
Well, first, you want to find a quiet space.
Okay.
Where you can relax and focus inward.
Right.
Dim the lights.
Okay.
Light some candles.
Yeah.
Maybe put on some calming music.
Right. Set the mood.
Exactly. Anything that helps you create a peaceful atmosphere.
Okay, so set the mood.
Yeah.
Then what?
Then close your eyes and bring the image of the person you've been thinking about to mind.
Okay.
Notice any feelings or sensations that arise as you do this.
Okay.
Don't try to control the image. Just let it appear naturally.
Okay, I'm picturing them.
And then imagine that this person is sitting across from you.
Okay.
And you can have a conversation with them. You can talk out loud if that feels comfortable.
Right.
Or you can just have the conversation silently in your mind.
Okay, so I'm picturing them sitting here with me, but what do I say to them? This is where I get stuck.
Well, the beauty of active imagination is that there's no right or wrong way to do it.
Right.
The key is to let your unconscious mind guide the conversation.
Okay.
If you're feeling angry at this person, let that anger out.
Okay.
If you're curious about why they're always on your mind, ask them.
So I could say something like, hey, why are you always popping up in my head?
Exactly. What are you trying to tell me?
What are you trying to tell me?
Or you could ask them what they admire about you or what they think you need to work on.
Interesting.
The point is to be open to whatever emerges.
Okay.
To allow those unconscious contents to kind of surface and express themselves.
Okay.
It might feel strange at first, but just trust the process.
And then what? What happens after I've had this imaginary conversation?
Then just observe what happened.
Okay.
What did they say? How did you feel?
Right.
Did any insights or realizations come up? During the conversation?
Okay.
You might want to write down your experience in your journal so you can reflect on it later.
This is starting to sound a little like therapy, but in a good way.
Well, Jungian psychology does have strong therapeutic applications.
Yeah.
And active imagination can be a very powerful technique for uncovering hidden motivations and working through unresolved emotions.
Especially if you're struggling with those persistent thoughts about someone. It can be a way of accessing those deeper layers of your psyche and gaining a new perspective on those relationships.
Okay, active imagination, definitely something I'm going to try.
Yeah.
The article also mentioned dream analysis as another tool.
Oh, yeah.
I have vivid dreams all the time, but I never know what to make of them.
Well, dreams are another powerful way that our unconscious mind communicates with us.
Okay.
And Jung believed they were a direct line to those deeper layers of the psyche.
Okay.
So, if you're constantly thinking about someone, they might very well start showing up in your dreams.
Oh, wow. Okay, so how do you actually analyze a dream?
Right.
Mine are usually this bizarre mix of random people and events.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, there are a few things to pay attention to.
Okay.
First, notice the overall feeling of the dream.
Okay.
Was it scary, joyful, confusing? Right.
That emotional tone can give you a clue about, like, the underlying message.
Okay.
Then focus on the key symbols and images that stand out to you.
Okay.
Don't worry about interpreting every detail.
Right.
Just go with what, like, grabs your attention.
Like, if the person I'm thinking about is riding a unicycle in a clown suit in my dream, that probably means something, right?
It probably does.
Okay.
Jung believed that dream symbols are often very personal.
Okay.
So what a clown represents to you might be different from what it represents to me. It's about paying attention to your own associations with those symbols.
So it's not about finding the correct interpretation in a dream dictionary.
Exactly.
But about exploring what those symbols mean to me personally.
Exactly.
Okay.
And, it could be helpful to look for patterns in your dreams. Is this person showing up repeatedly?
Okay.
Are there any recurring themes or motifs?
Right.
That kind of repetition can often point to, like, an unresolved issue.
Interesting.
Or a message your unconscious is trying to convey.
Okay, so we've got journaling, mindfulness, active imagination, dream analysis.
Yeah.
That's quite a toolkit for self-exploration.
It is. It is.
An article emphasized, it's not about using all of these techniques, but about finding the ones that, like, resonate with you personally.
Exactly. What works for one person might not work for another.
Right. It's about experimenting and finding what helps us unlock those deeper layers of ourselves.
The key is to be curious.
Yeah.
To be open to exploring those inner landscapes.
Right.
And to trust that the answers are within you.
It's about becoming our own, like, inner detectives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And who knows what fascinating discoveries we might make along the way.
It's incredible how we can start with something, like having someone stuck in our heads and turn it into this, like, journey of self-discovery.
Totally. It's like we're taking something that's, potentially frustrating, maybe distracting.
Yeah.
And we're transforming it into a tool for growth.
And I love how Jung and the Stoics, they have these different approaches, but they ultimately point us back to ourselves.
So true.
Like, hey, the answers you're looking for aren't out there, they're inside you.
It's about recognizing that those thoughts, those little intrusions, might actually be trying to tell us something important.
Yeah, it's like they're a knock on the door of our own unconscious.
Yes.
And it's up to us if we answer or not.
Yeah. And the Stoics, with their emphasis on, taking responsibility for our thoughts, would probably say that ignoring those prompts is like choosing to stay stuck.
Whereas embracing them, even if they feel uncomfortable, is how we awaken to our true potential.
It's about becoming more conscious, more intentional,
more
aligned with, like, our highest selves.
And that's where the real power of all this lies, right?
I think so.
It's not just about figuring out why this person's on our mind. No, but using that insight to create a better life.
Exactly.
This has been such a great conversation. I'm definitely going to be paying more attention to those thoughts from now on. What's one thing you hope listeners take away from this?
I think the most important thing is to approach those thoughts with curiosity and compassion.
Okay.
Don't judge yourself for having them. See them as messengers.
Okay.
Guides pointing you towards a deeper understanding of yourself.
I love that.
Yeah.
So it's not about getting rid of the thoughts, but learning from them.
Exactly.
And remember, you don't have to do this alone.
That's so important.
If those thoughts are overwhelming, or you're struggling to make sense of them, reach out to a therapist, a counselor, someone who can provide support and guidance.
That can make all the difference.
This is a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. I hope it gave you some food for thought and maybe inspired you to do a little self-exploration of your own. See you next time.